I was raised on a farm about 3 miles from here. My parents had a dairy farm. We got married in '74 and bought our first farm in '75, had 3 children. And then we added a second farm in '96, and that's the farm that we're currently sitting on here today, and kind of gotten involved in organics in '99.
I'll back up a little bit. I graduated from Penn State and I went into business for myself, and I was selling buildings and grain bins. I just happened to run into her dad, and that's when I met her. And the rest is history. And we've been farming ever since.
I went to school for ag engineering at Penn State, graduated from there, and went to work at Case New Holland as an engineer down there for 7 years. I always wanted to return to the farm at some point, just raise a family here like I was raised, I guess, and give them the same opportunities that I had growing up in the country, and being able to experience doing things with your hands and learning things at an early age. Land is that expensive to buy. You almost have to build it over a series of years. You can't just go out and say, I'm gonna start farming and go buy myself 500 acres, because the payments would be so high. You can't pay the interest plus pay the principal and still put enough in your pocket to make a living with all the equipment costs and all the machinery you need. It's just too much of a capital investment to start. If your family was farming and you kind of eased into it that way, you have a lot better chance than just saying you want to be a farmer and go buy everything.
Say, look at the leaves are starting to change on the mountain. You can tell it's autumn and the corn's starting to dry down. And behind you, you have beautiful clover. The bees like that. It's what they make honey out of. You hear a clover honey, that's what they do. Well, this is about in the middle of the 2 farms. The original farm is on the left, and on the right is where the mill farm is. The one's farm is 84 acres and the other one's 100 acres. And we combine them in the strips. You can see run the whole length of the 2 farms. And what we have a rotation here where we have the corn. And when the corn dries down and we harvest that, we'll plow that ground and we'll put spelt in this fall yet.
There was very few people growing food grade spelt and also processing food grade spelt. So that was one of the reasons why we saw it as a niche market, to be able to get into it and create a little more value here on the farm.
When we were conventional, we were barely making $50 an acre clear, and the taxes were more than that. So I mean, the numbers weren't there. And she worked full-time and I'd work full-time. It was an uphill struggle.
You're getting paid 2.5 times usually more for your commodity that you're growing, being organic. So if land is a limiting option, you can generate more revenue off a given piece of land.
Plus, we always raised our own food. Didn't believe in all the pesticides and herbicides and whatever that everybody's using. I can still remember they thought I was nuts when I started going organic. We'd go to these crop meetings and they'd say, what are you doing here? You're organic.
I think we believe wholeheartedly in trying to eliminate chemical usage on the food we grow and the food people eat. And I think that that's one of the biggest pushes that we had to become organic, was to provide healthy and wholesome food for animals and people to eat.
Here we have this year's corn crop. It's drying down. This corn will be used for cornmeal, for bakers. We have distillers that grind this to make whiskey. So that's a couple uses, besides animal feed, that this corn will go for, is organic corn. Here we have a field of rye that we planted about 3 weeks ago. And you can see the plants they're pretty little right now. This will get probably about 4 feet high. And then we'll combine that, and it'll be used for rye flour or rye meal, or the distillers use that. And then we'll put the straw back in the ground for organic matter.
When we first started, we were selling to other mills. And then when we started under our own name, Small Valley Milling, most of our accounts were bakeries that were looking to source ancient grains at the time. We say ancient grains here, I mean there's a lot of them, but the three that we deal with are spelt, emmer, and einkorn.
Here I brought some samples of grain from past years that we harvested. Here we have wheat that has awns on it. In my pocket I have emmer, which is an ancient grain. You can see how small they are. That's why it's so expensive, because the grains are so little compared to the wheat. And on the other hand, I brought some spelt, which is also in the hull. And you can see the difference in the kernel size between these.
Modern wheat was developed, so you run through the field with a machine called a combine harvester, and that harvests the grain, cuts it off, and also cleans it. And if you look at the grain that's coming in the combine bin, you can grab a handful of it and eat it, or grind it in a home mill and turn it into flour and be ready to bake with it. With spelt, you can't do that. All those grains, emmer, einkorn, and spelt, have a husk that tightly holds the kernel and has to be processed or threshed out to be able to use it. We're in the cleaning house here at Small Valley Milling, where the grain is cleaned before it's sent over for further processing for flour milling or bagging as whole grain kernels. Here we have some emmer in the hull yet. This is another whole grain that has to be dehulled before we can process it into flour. And if we take one of these kernels that's in the hull, we can actually take the two grains out of there. This is what the dehulling process would be doing. Once it's out of there, we have a kernel that looks similar to wheat, and we can process that into flour, or we can use it as a whole grain. We can eat it exactly like it is there. Modern wheat was developed from spelt because people didn't want to have to deal with that outer husk and this additional process. Man started looking for another way to make this process easier for us to take it from the field and take it right to the flour mill and mill it instead of having to handle it another time. But in the process, we lost protection of the grain, keeping it fresh and keeping insects off of it, and all different reasons that we might have had a hulled grain to begin with. We're here to show you the reduction process that takes whole grain and turns it into two end products, white flour and animal feed, or the mids that come off. The roller milling process, we're taking the kernel. We got a lot of intermediate processes till we get to the end, and these are our end products, white flour and bran. The white flour is nice, white, fluffy flour, which doesn't have a whole lot of nutrition anymore, just carbohydrates and starch. And the bran, it has all the B vitamins and a lot of the minerals in it. When you make whole flour, we're retaining all of the nutrition because we're taking the whole kernel and grinding it down into flour, and nothing is taken off or extracted. So as you can see, it's a lot more simple process. Making whole flour, you take the whole kernel, it goes to the mill and gets turned into whole flour.
You know, in the long run, looking back, I think if we would have known what we know now about grains being necessary for you and that sort of thing, we wouldn't have refined our flours like we have. Some of these ancient grains were kind of cast by the wayside, and people didn't realize their worth and allowed our food systems to decline like they have. Look, that's what people do every day. They try to cut corners and, you know, make things easier and less work.
A lot of farmers do want to raise nutritious crops that go for food grade grain instead of animal feed. That's an important part of the whole food economy here locally, to have support from the consumer end. Obviously, they're driving everything. There's reasons that they may want to continue to purchase that and vote with their dollar from a grassroots level, saying, I'm willing to purchase this product because that food hasn't had to travel as far, it's fresher, it tastes better, We're supporting a lot of local organic growers that are family farms.
We do try to be loyal to our customers as well as to our clients who are growing for us, people that are out there supporting local farmers like ourselves.